Hey everybody, it's Francis, and I want to welcome you to the new What a Hell of a Way to Dad podcast. All of the same content that you've been enjoying, but Nate and I have not been in the military for multiple years at this point, and we've decided that what we really want to talk about is parenting. So you're going to still get a lot of the same great content. Patreon is still going to have all of our bonus episodes, all of the old bonus episodes, 8 years of bonus content is still there. $5 a month gets you access to all of that, and you will continue to get 3 episodes a month going beyond that. We've got our ongoing Deadliest Warrior series that we're running. We have a MASH cast that I do with Carrie. We have a lot of really great stuff over there, so if you like what you're hearing here and you want to hear a little bit more, patreon.com/hellofawaytodie is where to find all of that. You can also check out our store, whatahellofawaytodad.com. It has all the things from our old store, but also it's got a few new sections. It's got an apparel section, it's got the podcast attic, and it has art and handmade stuff. So give it a look. whatahellofawaytodad.com. Find yourself something new. Thank you for listening and enjoy the show.
Glory, glory, what a hell of a way to die. Glory, glory, what a hell of a way to die. Glory, glory, what a hell of a way to die. He ain't gonna jump no more.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of What a Hell of a Way to Dad. It's Francis again with you, and this week I have Jasper Craven with me. Jasper, you've not been on since we have done our rebrand, but we're still a lot of the writing and the articles and the things you've been doing. I'm very interested in. So, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing great. So, you wrote something for Harper's Magazine. I noticed that I hadn't seen anything from you in a while. It seemed like you kind of dropped out of the reporting gig, and then suddenly you're back on with this new article called "The Thin Purple Line," wherein you go out and you got a real job for once, right? So,
Yeah. I sort of shuffled off into the drudgery of 9 to 5.
yeah, you got or 3 to 11, as it turns out here. You went out and got a job as a security guard to kind of give a deeper look into the world of security. Not that line between a cop and not a cop, and somewhere in between, there's a person that gets paid $9 an hour but also owns a gun for some reason. And you kind of found a place for yourself there, and 800,000 of your fellow employees. So let me ask first, what is it that made you want to pursue this article and kind of go down this rabbit hole?
Well, I live in New York and I stayed in New York, during the worst of the pandemic. And so I sort of saw the city shut down. I saw the old New York, I saw it shut down, and then I sort of saw it reopen again in a sort of weird, strange way. New York doesn't feel like it did before COVID in a lot of ways. Many places don't. But one of the sort of like most conspicuous developments post-COVID in New York is just like the skyrocketing of security guards. They are everywhere. I think the first sort of like really bizarre experience I had with a guard post-COVID came when I went to my local burrito joint and basically had to be let in by like a beefy security guard. And I just sort of found the whole experience bizarre. I live in a safe neighborhood, and I just like couldn't fathom why there was this like strong gentleman guarding the gates to my burrito joint. And so, once you sort of start looking for security guards, you see them everywhere, at least in New York. Like I just sort of found myself really overwhelmed by their presence. And, often in just like new and completely unnecessary environments, whether it was my burrito joint or like ATM vestibules or just sort of like standing around on the subway platform. And so that just sort of got me thinking about the industry and wondering what was fueling this rise and who was profiting off of it, and just sort of like what the experience was like as a guard, because it's such a common job now.
Yeah, I do notice. I was in Kansas City over Labor Day weekend for my daughter had a dance competition, and along with the hotel that we were staying at, there's also an Irish festival. They always have a Labor Day Irish festival, and I did notice a lot more like, in the festival itself it seemed fine, and getting in, they do a cursory bag check, but like not really go through, just like open your bag, make sure there's not a very obvious gun in there, and kind of move on. But inside the hotel there are a lot of these uniformed security guards that are decked out like cops, but they're not cops, which is a very strange line to be crossing here, because I know that when you're a police officer, you have things like qualified immunity and you can get away with a lot more because you're a cop, right? You get to, I say stop, you have to stop because I'm the cop. But these security guards who also are carrying guns and wearing a badge and have this like air of authority, but are probably getting paid dirt nothing money. And the moment they pull their gun out, they could go to jail for it. And I don't really understand, like, what is it that compels people to work these low paying jobs? Go be a cop, I guess, is what I'm saying. Like, why are you stopping here at the security guard job when you could go and like be an actual cop and, for lack of anything else, make way better money. um s and I know in your article you talk to people who are like ex veterans, ex loss prevention, and ex cops that kind of fall into this. So what is it there? What is drawing people to do these kinds of security jobs?
Yeah, I mean it's funny you mention, cops, because you're completely right. I mean, in so many regards, security personnel are just, you know, like a sort of weird disempowered version of a cop. They're paid less, they're treated terribly, they have no real power. And so the question as to what drives them to the job is a good one. I mean, there's a number, I think, of sort of like prevailing reasons. One is that security guards are often people who were former cops who got kicked off the force and can't join another department, or for whatever reason they have a background that would prevent them from becoming a cop, a criminal record perhaps, or they just don't want to fully commit to the training, which I would argue is still insubstantial, to becoming a cop. This is a very easy pathway to securing some level of status, some cheap feeling of power. And so I think a lot of people, take the path because it's easy, and, you can still sort of conceive of yourself in some weird warped way as preventing crime or making a difference. I mean, the other thing is just that, like, it's such an easy job, and it's such a common job now. I mean, I say this in the piece, but the company I worked for, Allied Universal, is now the third largest employer in America behind Walmart and Amazon. And so, if you're just looking for cheap, an easy way in to make some money that, where you're not really scrutinized very much, and, you just sort of have few other options, this is a good bet. And oftentimes in a lot of communities, it's one of the few bets you can get into without, a college degree.
Sure. Like you gotta. I would say you have to pass a drug test, but even in your story, you don't really have to pass a drug test. Uh, you know, you have it is a an easy way to get a modicum of what somebody might consider respect. Like, I'm a security guard, people have to respect me, but I have never in my life respected a security guard. Like, not in a I go and talk shit on them or make fun of them, or try to antagonize them. But every security guard that I've ever seen, I've always thought, like, this is a useless waste of time and money and energy for you to be here. Like, I don't see a regular security guard of any kind stopping any kind of threat, right? Like, that's not even what you do. You are a security guard. Something happens, you call the real cops, it seems.
Yeah, totally. Really, security guards are valued insofar as they offer eyes and ears to corporate clients and to the police. They are just, basically human scarecrows, human closed circuit cameras. They are just there as a deterrent, a passive force, someone who can spot something if it's happening and report it up the chain. I mean, there's an element too where like they are expendable in this way and they are easily targeted. There are stories of security guards being put in active shooter situations, for instance, and acting valiantly to stop an active shooter. There's also cases where criminals come into a space, they see a security guard, and that's the first person they target. I mean, you have a target on your back just by your uniform, and so it can be. I have real. I feel for security guards in those scenarios because they're being paid like shit, and yet they still sort of have this aura that makes them a target, even though they don't have the training to respond to that target most of the time. And, sometimes they're armed, but many other times they aren't.
Right. I see way more security guards without guns than I see them with guns, and that's, I feel a good thing. Fewer guns out there in the hands of people who are not being very well trained, and I don't trust most people with guns. And I'm certainly, I'm not a gun grabber, but I am a gun reconsiderer. Perhaps you should reconsider if you should own a gun if you're sitting here screaming at a cloud at night. So, but these security guards, as you mentioned in the article, it feels like more of a security theater kind of thing, right? Like the TSA doesn't necessarily keep us any safer with all of the stuff. Like they'll take your full bottle of water or of sunscreen or whatever, and then we'll turn around and sell it. They're taking it away from you because it could be dangerous, and then they'll put it up and sell it for on eBay or pocket knives and things like that. All these things that they say, well, you can't take it on there because it's dangerous, but also we can sell this in lots on the internet. And it really just kind of lends to, we don't necessarily need security, but everybody suddenly thinks that we need security. The rise of fear in America, even though every metric is telling us crime is going down, right? Like and I don't know what we can attribute that to. Maybe it is the thin purple line. I doubt that because I don't have security guards around me in my neighborhood when somebody decides to let off a couple rounds in the middle of the night. But we have these lower crime stats. Things are demonstrably safer than they have been, and yet everybody still wants these security guards because they want to feel safe and they want to feel secure. And I feel like that's in a world of, in case of an emergency, there's somebody who knows what to do, and that's just not true at all. That person probably does not know what to do. You mentioned when you finally got on the job and you started, you asked a question like, well, this is how we can tell if somebody tries to come in with a gun or a bomb. It's like, well, what do you do if somebody's trying to come in with a bomb? Like, well, you call your supervisor. That guy's got a bomb though. Like, that's not a like, hey, can you stand off to the side here for a minute? I just got to call somebody to make sure,
Right.
I got to call EOD down here. And the whole thing just kind of falls apart when you find out that, well, yes, you said there are people who act valiantly, and that's not necessarily just security guards. It's just regular people act valiantly in times of high stress and times of danger. And it's good to have, perhaps as you said, an eyes and ears, somebody who's just roving around. Nobody's going to break in if they see a security guard kind of walking around in the building, but also you're not really stopping anything. And if something does happen, you don't have the tools as a security guard to really protect against that.
Right. Yeah. It is a farcical industry built on, imagery and sort of like a smoke screen of protection more than anything else. I mean, I sort of point out in the piece that there's this idea and this sort of like this language that the industry leans very heavily on, that, we offer a sense of security, which is exactly that, just this sort of idea, this emotional comfort, but really nothing else. Um, and I think that this sort of like this fear was really inculcated in 9/11, in a major way, that sort of, an attack is around every corner, or could be around every corner, and so there just need to be people at those corners that can step into the breach and like deal with it. And so, it's that was sort of the first big spike in security, or really the second, at least in New York. The first being sort of with, the Fear City crime era of the 1970s. But uh, guarding really took off post 9/11, despite the fact that, guards were then in charge of airport security and let the hijackers through, because they, were not trained, were not paid enough to pay attention adequately. And yet,
Well, and also were box cutters banned on flights back then? Like it's so far back in memory at this point. I don't remember. I was flying on airplanes, at the age of 15 or 16. But I also want.
they had recently been outlawed. It's a good question, but because for a while you could bring box cutters on planes, but the feds did outlaw them. But clearly the companies overseeing security either didn't properly train their people on that regulation, or their people were just, again, underpaid and didn't give a shit, and let it slide.
Yeah, and I have some unfortunate news for all of you about the TSA, who are also underpaid and let a lot of shit slide.
Yeah, yeah.
So
Uh,
let's talk about the. I want to go back to the training, because you spent a lot of time in the article talking about the training that you went through, and how it seems like you had an instructor that was overtly political the entire time, but making a, I guess trying to walk this line of like, yes, you're very important, but also no, you're not very important.
yeah, no, I mean, I could not have asked for a more perfect symbol of the industry than my trainer. Here's a guy who served in the Army for 6 years, is very proud of his service, talked about it in broad sweeping terms, acknowledged that he didn't see combat, but still very much had the psyche of someone who did. I describe it in the piece as sort of like an anticipatory PTSD. Like this, again, I mean, it really just boils down to fear. But my trainer really steeled us for a very dark, dangerous world. And, basically cast us as key protectors of the public. Really sort of at times lionized the industry and his own role in it, and a guard's ability to save lives and take down threats. But then there were these candid moments where he acknowledged that we didn't really have any legal authority, that in fact the company urged us to not touch anyone whatsoever, for fear that it could result in some sort of, litigation. And then, his main mantra that he kept repeating was like, "You're not getting paid much at all. If anything pops off, you should run. That is my advice." Um, and so, it's like this weird conflicting world where there is some level of expectation, should something go down, that you react. And that, I mean, and that, doesn't mean necessarily, engaging in fisticuffs or tackling an intruder or something, but, you know, calling your supervisor, calling the cops, radioing to the, staff of the building so that they can organize a evacuation, things like that. So there is this expectation that you do something which feels really heavy and felt really heavy during my training. And yet the training itself was a total joke. We really didn't learn anything at all. It was again just sort of this like this flimsy idea of a training that can make like corporate clients and employers feel good that they're hiring qualified, certified, licensed security personnel, and they can boast about that to whomever. But really, we were just there in 3 days for 3 days, sitting through his often bizarre tirades about COVID and Bill Gates, targeting the population and the healing benefits of remdesivir and, stolen elections and the end of the world. And, he had prepper vibes. He really cast the city as like awash in violent crime, which it was not. And so you could tell too that just being in the industry for as long as he has, about 40 years, it can really sort of like the rhetoric that the industry uses can really seep into you in a real way at some point. And there were flashes of that, while also sort of more frank admissions of the job's actual reality.
Right, the importance, the what you're actually going to be doing. Like it is a weird juxtaposition to have this, like we are the thing that stands between the terrorists and the populists, and yeah, the Bill Gates released COVID or whatever, and all of these insane things, but also to just be like, yeah, but also if something happens, you just got to run. Like there's no, and it's I don't like look, I understand that, like, if you have fear, one of the best ways to conquer that fear is to experience it or at least be prepared for it, right? Like I don't conceal and carry a gun. I can because it's Missouri. I don't because I just don't. I don't want to have to think about it all the time, right? But I have a backpack that has some Quick Clot in it, and it's got a tourniquet in it, one of the good ones that I paid good money for. And those are things, and like, look, I have these things on me. If something goes down, I can be effective, and it stops me from worrying about so much stuff. It gives me that, like, I feel prepared for an emergency if one happens. And I feel like in the security realm, you're still trying to do that same thing, but like the things that you're afraid of here, or the things that your instructor is telling you to be afraid of, everything from stolen elections and eating horse paste to shit your intestines out or whatever so that you don't get COVID. Like these all seem like these weird fears that are there, but not really, because you're not actually doing anything effective against them. You're a guy who is very knowledgeably training these people to not do anything. Like I say knowledgeably, like this guy knows that what he's doing is not very useful. It feels like it if he's telling you, it's more of a soapbox, it seems, for him to give off all the weird shit that he wants to do, but he's going to push everybody through anyway, because while he's afraid of these things, he doesn't give a shit if you guys get the correct training and information. Like, I just to go back to my time in the Army, I was public affairs. I was not a ground pounder. I was not a door kicker, but they still taught us how to kick doors. They still taught us how to do stack teams. They taught us how to use our rifles, because they're like, look, you probably won't, but you might. And if you need to, here's how to do these things. And we got good training. We spent 2 months of training before we went to a war zone. And then, we come to the security thing, and it's, we're going to run through a couple of PowerPoints. We're going to skip over most of them, and then I'm going to give you the answers to the quizzes at the end. So I don't understand how, for this teacher, like, he feels like, yes, I'm doing something that's actually creating a better world and making people more protected, because all he's doing is pushing a bunch of people through to get to the next group, because that's how he makes his money.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's a really astute point. And, certainly questions his motives and his passion. I mean, he was a very good performer. Like, he had a rapt audience. There were young men in that audience who, like, really were inspired by him, I think, strangely enough. Like, people were hanging on his every word. They were taking notes on what he was saying. Like, there was definitely a strain in that crowd that wanted to be there because they liked the idea of wearing a uniform and they liked the idea of saving lives or just like contributing to society. And you know, that's a pure that's often a really pure instinct. You know, I mean, I can be very critical of the military, but one thing that has always like really, you know, been inspiring to me is how many people join the military, you know, out of some pure sense of service and really wanting to contribute. There are a million other reasons, of course, some good, some bad, some economic. But, you know, I think there's an element here too where like society is so cracked, politics is broken, communities are, you know, atomized. And so, and amid all that, like people really do want to help. They want to contribute. They want to have some sense of meaning in their lives. And there's a certain there's a certain subset that go into guarding because of that, or at least in part because of that. And it seems like Rodriguez, my trainer, had some of those feelings too. And maybe that's what inspired him to join the army at first. What inspired him to you know, become a trainer. And like clearly you're right. I mean, he is so internally aware of what he's doing and the fact that it's a total charade. And yet I don't know if it's just like forced delusion or just theatrics that's sort of like pushing this sort of passion. But yeah, you have to question his motives or his sort of like underlying thinking, because whatever he says, whatever he pledges, whatever he sort of, you know, thinks to himself, there's just like such evident incompetence with his trainings and with the industry writ large.
Hmm. Yeah, and I feel like this kind of I don't know, that disassociation between the two of like I am here to make you the best and the strongest and the brightest, but also we're not actually going to put time or effort into that is not like it's not helpful. Obviously, like you know, as security guards, not necessarily all that helpful. Like I'm not a we need to ban security guards completely, but obviously we need to rethink uh, how we do them, why we have them, what roles they fill, and things like that. But you know, you're not really helping out if you're just pushing through like a guy who tests positive for meth and be like, yeah, you can be a guard, that's fine. Like he does meth. Like, do you know what people who do meth do? They steal copper pipes. Like, don't put him in one of the big buildings.
Yeah. Yeah, no, totally. And you know, uh even sort of more disturbing is the fact that New York is considered one of the more rigorous states when it comes to guard oversight and regulation. You know, many states have no form of guard accreditation or licensing or training at all. Um and you know, those are also states that often have loose gun laws. So it is very easy in much of America to get a gun, become a guard, and go straight out into the streets.
Look,
Um,
Jasper, I already own a gun, and there's a Spirit Halloween like less than a mile from me. I can go be a security guard right now.
yeah, exactly.
And like,
Uh,
and technically, there's nothing wrong. Like, I can. There is no license for conceal and carry in my state, so there's nothing like even we have a private security firm here in St. Louis, and I don't know if it's spread out anywhere else, but they have cruisers with lights on it that say police on the side. They are not police. They
yeah,
are not cops whatsoever. But they put police on the side of it, and it seems like there's no regulation to say who do you have to who do you have to pay attention to in these situations, because one way or the other it's just a guy with a gun telling you what to do, and like in Missouri that's a license to get shot yourself.
yeah,
And you know, okay, maybe you've got the nice uniform and everything, but you know, now this just creates a whole world of like, okay, well, I got a guy pointing a gun at me. I don't know who he is. He's got a badge, but he's not a cop. He's not St. Louis Police Department. He's not, you know, the federal cops that we have down there. He's a guy in a cruiser that says police, and he's pointing a gun at me. Where do you like? I don't know. It's just it's watching the security here in St. Louis and seeing it in other places, you start to kind of get this like, you guys are blurring the lines too much. And like, it's not just that this is dangerous for me, it's dangerous for you. Cause
Yeah.
like, you're not cops at
Right.
all. You don't get the protections that cops do. And if I shoot you because you're pointing a gun at me, in essence, I'm just cast a line at this point. You're not a cop. So you just got gunned down by, some middle-aged dude for $9, $9.80 an hour or so. It makes this kind of a really dangerous, like it's creating the danger that it's trying to protect against, or it's just created a new kind of danger, I guess.
No, absolutely. I mean, all of these the various forces are sort of colliding at this moment that are creating blurred lines and just like confusion in law enforcement. One is the fact that there are super loose regulations, and there's really no regulation whatsoever over how guards present themselves, the imagery they use, the uniforms, the badges, any of that stuff. There's also at least during the George Floyd era, a lot of cops were quitting departments, which led municipalities to hire on guards basically as cops to sort of fill the ranks. And so some of them were basically being deputized in some quasi legal way with the powers of cops, even though there was none of the oversight or training or anything else. And then, yeah, like the rise of, stand your ground laws and the sort of phenomenon of militias and concerned citizens, quote unquote, showing up at protests armed to sort of like be protectors and to keep the peace, even though they're the only people there armed, and are just sort of like creating this sort of what feels like a fuse that's that's primed to explode and create violence. So yeah, no, I mean, if anything, on the whole, guards are contributing to danger. They are creating a heightened sense that there is some sort of danger to be protected against, when often that's not the case. Um, and yeah, really, their efficacy is completely it's completely it doesn't exist. There are many like experts in the field of guarding, and I spoke to many of them. This has been around as an industry for a long time, and not one independent study has like ever created positive, causation with between like a guard's presence and the security of the atmosphere he's in.
Well, just his presence there keeps the bad guys away, right? Like, certainly nobody would go rob the bank just because there's some doe-eyed 22-year-old with a gun there. Yeah, and I personally have never felt. I don't feel safe when I see somebody with a gun, no matter what instance that is. I mean, if I'm at a gun range, sure, but walking around inside of a hotel and somebody walks by and they have a gun on their hip, that's just Missouri. You have to get used to that, but it doesn't provide me with a feeling of safety. It just provides me with, if somebody starts shooting, there's another gun that's going to start going off, and I'm going to guarantee you that whoever that is does not have the trigger time to put rounds on a target properly and not just fire wildly into a crowd themselves, which is always the concern in these kinds of situations. You get a mass shooter kind of situation, and then everybody else pulls out their guns and starts shooting too. And then now it's like, well, who's the mass shooter? Now I got 5 people with guns shooting when there was just one guy. So this, I of course I can sit here and tell you all the different reasons why this is going to be a problem, but the buildings, these Fortune 500 companies, they don't see this themselves. And so you ended up working at a building in New York, but I'm before we get to that, I'm curious, like, what other places, like, because I know I see private security at like my local grocery store, um, the bank I go to, but they always have like the same guy there, and he's really nice. I haven't seen it at any of my fast food places, although I will say I went to Honduras for a couple of weeks back in 2005 before the coup. And even back then, like to go to a KFC in Tegucigalpa, there was a guy with an AK-47 who was just like hanging out outside and opened the door for us. He was very nice, but it's like, why do you have this guy with an AK? They're like, well, there's money here, and anywhere that there's money, somebody else with an AK might run in here and rob it. So we got to have our own guy with an AK just to say, look, this is a hardened target. It's not going to be easy to steal money from the colonel here.
Yeah, insane.
So you worked at a can you say which company you worked for? You worked at, I guess.
Yeah, so I was hired by Allied Universal and they stationed me at BNY Mellon, which is actually one of the oldest banks in America, founded by Alexander Hamilton. It now mostly does like securities and like retirements and things like that. Like it's not a bank with a vault. But I
Also do a
was
lot of fraud, it seems.
that is true. That is true. But yeah, I was stationed at their like global headquarters, which sits just near the World Trade Center.
So you work 2 days a week there. Did they? And I wonder, is that something that you asked for? Like, hey, just put me on for two nights a week, or is that just a like you're the new guy, you don't get to even sniff overtime pay until you've been doing this for a couple of months?
Yeah, so I mean, because the industry is exploding and also the turnover rate is exceptionally high, somewhere around maybe 600%. They need people at all hours for all shifts whenever. I mean, they will just take a warm body that walks through the door. So, my calculation was that this job pays terribly. I needed to continue with other freelance work. And so, luckily enough, they have a lot of part time options available. So, yeah, I was the one who requested part time and took a couple shifts here and there when they needed fill ins. But yeah, I sort of bet that if I worked part time, 3 p.m. to 11 for about 6 months, I could credibly claim to understand the job and the people and my employer. So really, it was just, trying to balance my other commitments with this one.
Sure, this isn't a career. It's a an opportunity to see how the beast works and report on it. And you talked about a gentleman that you worked with, Carlos, who had a lot of possibly kind of hateful ideas, or not really hateful, but the ideas of a man who's afraid, right? Like afraid of what could be happening, but also is like one of the nicest guys ever too. Like he's an older guy in his 70s, which like honestly, if you're going to be a security guard, a guy in their 70s is what I would expect. Somebody who's a nice old guy who can smile and remembers everybody's name and runs the X-ray machine. You don't really need too much beyond that.
Yeah.
Did the other people you work with, did you kind of get that same feel, or does every other guard kind of give off its own vibe?
Well, I mean, I was actually quite lucky, I think, with the coworkers I got. I'd been looking at lawsuits against the company just in New York State alone, and there are so many pending suits involving, sexual misconduct and sexual exploitation by like senior management, mostly towards female guards. Um, you know, Wage theft is like a huge concern at Allied. Lots of suits alleging that, and just like really toxic work environment. So I didn't experience any of that. Thankfully, the people I worked with were all really nice and really hardworking, and I mean, each of them bought into the sort of the myth of guarding uh, at sort of their own level. you know uh, the gentleman you described, my sort of partner as it were on the x-ray machine, he was a former uh, NYPD guy, and he worked in communications too, actually, and he was very disturbed by what he saw as real, like, regression in the city. He lived through the crime of the Fear City era, and he basically had the position that the NYPD and law enforcement in general needed to be sort of deputized again to just crack skulls and send a message out that, like, that law enforcement is back. We're in charge. We're not going to let criminals run these streets. He watched a lot of Fox News. He had all of these um, assumptions about crime in the subways, especially. I note in the piece that, he basically got a private car home. I think he lived in the Bronx every night from work because he was afraid of crime on the subway. And this was for, an elderly guy not making very much money who was suffering from pretty serious health problems. So I think that like illustrates just how worried he was. And he was like eagle eyed. I was just, and many of my coworkers were just sort of like standing there, not really paying much attention because frankly, we weren't being paid enough to do that. But he like was always watching, always sort of, looking for potential red flags to, send up the chain. I remember one of his things was, oftentimes there would be like Asian businessmen coming through to deal with the bankers. And I was supposed to basically escort any non-employees to the X-ray machine. Employees didn't need to have their stuff X-rayed, but outsiders did. And he would always rag on me because I just like I didn't like adequately profile the Asian people coming through the door enough. And he would always be like, those were like Asian businessmen. They don't work here. Who knows what were in those bags? Like, go get them. We need to X-ray their stuff. So he was really bought in.
Yeah, the Asian businessmen knowing that the best way to do business is to blow up the bank that they're working with.
Yeah,
Sure.
right. Yeah,
Sure,
yeah.
man.
And the bank itself, I say this in the piece, but like there were so many guards at this one building, at least a dozen at all times. There were booths outside where they were stationed. There was a guy, monitoring all of the outdoor cameras. There was this inner sanctum that I was never allowed to even know its location, where internal cameras were being monitored by crew. There were cops that the bank hired, NYPD cops that were there much of the day. There was a private guy who had a drug sniffing dog. And then they told me that there was an undercover Fed there the whole time. They wouldn't say who it was or give me much more, but like I also just kept hearing that. Maybe it was a rumor, maybe it wasn't, but it was insane how like heavily protected this bank was. And yeah, I got into a number of arguments with Carlos about politics and about sort of like what I felt were his, unfair and yeah, sometimes sort of hateful views towards, immigrants and things of that nature. But the longer we worked together, I found, yeah, he had a real sweetness to him. And ultimately, I came to the conclusion that like he really embodied what I view to be sort of the one potential positive um, influence of security guards, which is just to be like a warm presence in public or private spaces. I mean, everybody loves to just leave work and have someone wish them a good night or to check in with them about their kids. And he was really good at doing that.
Yeah, when I go, the last time I had to go to jury duty, you have to go through metal detector to get into the courthouse building, and everybody there is like all the people who are running it, super nice. They've obviously been working there, all of them, for a long time. Like people, city workers know who they are and talk with them, and like if you've got to have this this level of security, which like I completely understand. They didn't. It wasn't exactly TSA backscatter stuff, but put your bag on the X-ray machine, walk through the thing. It's not going to go off for your belt or your wristwatch or anything, but if you have something large and metal, it will probably go off for that. And it does. It at least gives you that, like, all right, maybe it's not like I feel safe and protected here, or maybe you do because everybody in here doesn't, isn't able to just sneak a gun in, but also just having a friendly presence to walk into. Let's be honest, the courthouse is not exactly the most welcoming place. No matter what reason you're there, and especially the one in St. Louis because it's an old building that really needs to be taken down to the ground and rebuilt. But that's my argument with the city, not necessarily with the guards there. But yeah, it's great to have these nice people who are who will joke with you and they laugh. They, every time, every week they have jury people come in, so they're always talking to us and telling us what to do, making sure that we're in the right place, but not like assholes, right? They're not like, you need to get over there, you need to be in that line. Just, hey, here's where all the jury people are going. Here's where you're going. Here's what's going to happen when you get in there. If it's your first time or if it's been a while, here's what to expect. And that, like, as I said, I don't think all security guards need to be thrown out, but we do need to have these a better conversation about, like, what exactly do we need these security guards for? And I haven't sat down and talked to any of them about their politics. I don't know if those guys are worried about, I don't know, immigrants or whatever. I don't think that they were, but it's the passing. I pass through the metal detector and I go on my way. It's not that big a deal. Although I did get pulled aside because they saw the tourniquet in my backpack and were asking what it was. And I pulled it. I was like, "It's a tourniquet." And they said, Why do you carry a tourniquet?" And I said, "Because you don't let me carry a gun." And he says, "Yeah, fair enough. All right." So they've got that. They've got a little bit of that security mentality too.
Yeah, yeah.
So let me ask Jasper. As I'm sure you were part of that 600% turnover rate, how did you quit? And was anybody surprised by it? Was Carlos sad to see you go?
Well, it's
Are you still
Carlos.
working there? You're still working there, aren't you?
I have my license, man. Like, if it
It's
paid better, I would take shifts here and there. I mean, I do like just being out in the world. I'm so like cloistered up in my apartment. But yeah, the pay is just terrible. The pay is terrible.
Yeah. I mean, if I had a decent job where it's just like, just walk around at night and make sure nobody's like sleeping in the bathrooms, cool. But I'm not doing that for $9 an hour, especially not in New York City.
Yeah, no, totally. And I mean, like, there was a real stringency to what we could and couldn't do that also I felt was totally unfair and like led me to quit too. Like, I couldn't listen, for instance, to podcasts when I was patrolling the floors at night after all the staff had left. Like, I was prohibited from doing that. And um there were there are staff monitoring the cameras, and I was like called out when I did put my headphones in. So like, they won't even let you just like have these little moments or like
Who
goodies to
fucking
sort of.
watches The Watchmen?
Yeah, right, exactly. But yeah, so I I had not seen Carlos in a while. And I was a bit worried because, like I said, he's old and he had had some really serious health problems before I arrived. Like, he'd been in a coma for a long time. And so I sort of stayed a bit longer than I anticipated just because I wanted to like see him again. And it turned out that basically, my last shift, he came back. It just was sort of, chance. I didn't think at the end of the day I was going to see him again. And he didn't know I was leaving. And I saw him, and he told me that, he missed me. And it was like a very touching moment that we had. And, I really did not have it in me to tell him then that it was my last shift. I just sort of like caught up with him, and I probably should have done that. And I feel sort of a
Well, you know
bit.
where he works. You can always go in and bring a package that is ticking a little bit, and he'll call the supervisor. You can have a little get together. Everybody can go out for coffee and not listen to podcasts together.
No, I mean, I really do want to visit again. I think I'm gonna wait until like the sort of air clears a bit, because I don't want the company like freaking out. But I really want to give him an issue of the magazine to read, and I would love to just like say that I enjoyed working with him and everybody else there. That was a really sort of strange part to all of this, is going like quote unquote undercover. I didn't like adopt a new personality or anything, but I needed to keep some level of distance from these people, which was hard at the end of the day, because like I was working with them and they were all really solid people, and so to sort of just like disconnect very suddenly from that world was strange and hard in its own way, honestly.
Well, Jasper, I really appreciate you coming on to the show to talk about this, and to do this, to jump in and get a real feel for it, and not just write about it from the outside, but from the inside as well. And I do feel like you gave it a fair shake at it. It's not necessary. As we said, you had a good time with Carlos, even though you didn't necessarily agree with anything that he said. You do form these bonds, and I know you've never joined the military, but this is kind of the same. In some ways, it's very similar. Like, you're stuck in a situation with somebody who may not think the way that you do, and you have to find a way to make it bearable to work with one another, and you form bonds that way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe you're not going to invite him over for Thanksgiving dinner, but maybe he'll invite you over. So we'll see.
Yeah, well, I would love that, and I think that's a really important point. And I appreciate you having me on, as always.
Yeah, the link will be down in the show notes. Jasper, tell people where they can find you.
Best place to find me is on Twitter/X. My handle is just Jasper_Craven, Craven.
All right, Jasper, thank you so much. Everybody, thank you for listening, and we will talk to you next week.
Zoom, zoom.